Hello and welcome to Unscripted Abbreviated on Tuesday, the 18th of June. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
I've just walked my dogs through a very polleny common, so I come to you red-eyed today, but persevering with the news. And first of all, this interesting story of care staff in a care home, Gavin, who have been told that they need to seek permission through a waiver from relatives to call residents in the care home love or darling or sweetie or something like that, to use those kind of pet names. They need to have relatives sign a waiver. What do you make of this?
Well, there are two bits to me. I remember when I've been in hospital and people I don't know call me Gavin, and or a bit like Americans are worse. When I was younger and went to America, there was this level of enforced informality and intimacy. And in England, in my culture, you have to earn intimacy, and at least in certain areas of life. Anyway, I found enforced intimacy or unearned intimacy really quite difficult. But where I like it in care homes. I like it. I like it in shops sometimes when you go in. I remember as a law student going into a shop with a lovely elderly lady who used to call me Ducky, and I'm so at one level, I'd rather people sometimes call me Mr. Ashenden, but at another level, I hate the idea that people have to sign forms giving permission to be called Ducky, Love, or Darling, because I don't know, there's a kind of innocent affection, an innocent intimacy, a promise of care and neighborliness and kind of pseudo family support that you find, particularly amongst care staff, being called love. I mean, in some contexts, if you call someone your love and you don't know them, it's outrageous. But in another context, it's a declaration of I'm on your side. Let's do this together. I can help you. So I think it's terribly sad that we have to use consent forms now in places of innocence.
When I was growing up, I went to school with a boy who was one of 6 kids, I think, natural children of his parents, and his parents were foster parents, and they went to church, and at any one week there were 15, 14, 13, 16 children, all around, 6 of them their own and 6 or 7 foster children. And they often got babies of parents with AIDS, or in the time this would have been in the late 80s, early 90s. And they had babies sometimes with them for 4 or 5 years before they were adopted, and they loved these children. And their wall at home was full of every child they'd ever fostered. And I mean, well, I say one wall, walls and walls of their house. They took a photograph of each child that they fostered. They never adopted any, but they sometimes had foster children for a month and sometimes for years. They were unbelievably, and still are unbelievably, good people, sacrificial people. That's real love. That's the love abundant in their own spousal relationship that's overflowing with love of their own children and gives out to those neglected children. This is such a good. About 5 years ago, I spoke to the father and I said, are you still fostering? And he said, no. And he told me a story of having an infant on his knee, and the carer, the system, the bureaucrats came round and said, I can't remember the details, but said, you can't have this child on your knee unless you have 2 other people. One of them must be this person, one of them in a room at the time. And it was so uncaring. It was such a comment on where we've got in our society that he said, I can't function like this. I can't do this. I can't love these children in a way I've been doing for 20 years if you put these rules around it. And I thought, what they've lost in this family is phenomenal. But why have they lost it? And this brings me to something Peter Kreeft often talks about. I've mentioned him twice now in the last 2 days. We have community and chaos. They're opposites, aren't they? We co-inhere or it's incoherent. And when we fall into chaos as a community, there's 2 possible solutions. just because of using a C, he says cops and conscience, we'd say police. So there's either we rely on that internal law, that moral law, that natural law, to keep the chaos at bay and co-inhere as a community, or we don't. And if we don't, we have to rely on an external force. In the case of the police force or these other external rules. He says the more conscience a community has, the fewer cops it needs. But the more cops it has, the less conscience it needs to rely on. And it's a mixture of the two. On the one hand, we have lost our inner moral core. We've turned away from Christ. We're no longer a Christian country. We've lost any idea of a natural law. So we rely heavily on human law, on the external force, to be that external conscience that we've lost as a community. And then because we've lost it, we rely too much on the external force, so it's self-fulfilling. So we don't then use our conscience. He says here, Augustine's beautiful formula, amor meus pondus meum, my love is my weight, my gravity, my destiny. Social bodies as well as individual bodies need shields. Like the body physical, the body politic has two shields against chaos. The outer shield is positive law, that is, human law, which is enforced physically. The inner shield is natural law, moral law, not made by man but discovered, which is enforced spiritually by conscience. The inner shield is made of freedom. The outer shield is made of force. The inner shield is love, love of the good. The outer force is fear, the fear of punishment. Love is free, while fear is unfree. A community with fewer inner cops needs more outer cops. And I think that sums up whether personally, I happen to personally not mind love, ducky, darling, sweetheart. I think the offence we take so easily to those terms it partly points to our loss of our inner conscience and our reliance on the external cops.
Katherine, I think it was brilliant. I don't know how you did that. Coherence or incoherence. I mean, I know it's Crieff, but it's still extremely clever of you to get it together. The society with too few inner cops has to have outer cops and vice versa. Well, I was struggling to think my way through all that at the beginning and realizing I was doing a bad job, and you sum it up brilliantly. So I think that's great. Thank you very much.
We'll go to your second news story that you've picked out today from the Telegraph. Ian Duncan Smith has written today about concerns he has over, or rather tries to draw our attention to concerns that he says we should have over Russia, China, North Korea and Iran and the threat that they pose that we don't pay attention to. But this has raised an interesting observation from you. Do you want to tell us about that?
I'm hoping you'll put it all right at the end like you did for the first subject, because again, I'm wallowing and I'm underinformed. So, of course, Duncan Smith is right. Of course, this axis between China and Iran and Korea, North Korea, and Russia is a very dangerous one, very dangerous to the West. But I think what I think there are two things that I want to add, and one is that there's always the assumption that democracy is alive and kicking, and that we in the West are practicing democracy, but we're not. I forget how many democratic governments American foreign policy has overturned since the mid-60s, but it's 7, 8, or 9. It's a considerable number. The Americans present themselves as fighting for freedom and democracy, but actually have quite a tally of democracies they've overturned, including the Ukrainian government in 2012, the Maidan Revelation. But worse than that, I think there's a vacuum of political thought. And there's a man called Alexander Dugin who's much demonized in the West. And again, part of the problem is, where do you get your information from? If you get it from the mainstream media, it's almost all very badly twisted and comes with a level of untruth. I remember Dugin, who's been demonized for being Putin's philosophical brainchild, but I was invited to a rather discreet seminar with him, where he began to point out the difficulty that we have at the moment is in political philosophy. So fascism is there, but it's failed. Marxism is there, but it's failed. Capitalism is there, but it's failing. It's lifted a lot of people out of poverty, but it's rogue. It's not been contained in any way. And democracy is there, but it's failed. We don't have a working democracy in the European Communion. In our country at the moment, as the people we want to vote, we're being told that we're about to get the most unpopular government imaginable ever. Democracy isn't working. So Dugin was saying that the political philosophers need to come up with a new big idea of human beings organizing themselves. No one's done it yet. But to pretend that democracy is alive and well and being confronted only by China and Russia and North Korea isn't a very sensible way of looking at things. Interestingly enough, the previous editor of the Catholic Herald, Damien Thompson, has a group of Catholics who, I've forgotten the name of the political theory they espouse, which is really embarrassing. It's not redistributionists like Chesterton and Belloc. There's another word which implies a form of Catholic informed government, which he absolutely hates. And I don't. And it's very big in America. But
Is it integralism?
Yes, it is. Well, of course you knew. Said with such humility, it is integralism. And so I've looked at that, and I'm not sure I understand it at all. But I think what it represents is the need to do more political thinking, but particularly Catholic political thinking. And although Damien Thompson hates it, I suspect it may represent an attempt to do what Dugin is suggesting, which is to leave off with fascism, Marxism, democracy, and capitalism, and think afresh. So Duncan Smith is right, but I think he's stopping too early on in the quest for a reconfiguration of political categories and thought.
You said I'd add. All I wanted to add is that I was reading something very interesting about Pope John Paul II the other day for an article I was writing, and of course Pope John Paul II spent his papacy working for freedom from his abhorrence of communism and socialism, and he says he cautioned against defining freedom as total autonomy, although he recognised democracy as the best political philosophy available for freedom to flourish. If we see it as total autonomy and unchecked individual choice, it's a bad thing. So rather, his understanding of freedom involved the freedom for people to make the correct moral choice based upon universal truths found in the message of Christ, as the message is understood in Catholic teaching. The Pope understood one of these truths to be the transformative and redemptive powers of suffering. And then it goes on because it's about how if we say democracies are good because it enables us to be free, and understand freedom as no constraints, then it leads to a culture of death. Whereas democracy is good to the extent that it enables us to have freedom for something good. So it's a little bit of those ideas we see in integralism, but it's not a political philosophy. But just a reminder, really, to say that as Catholics we need to always remember what our freedom's for, and everything tends towards the good. Right.
Brilliant, Mrs. Bennett. Very good. Hugely impressive.
I'll leave it there and go and wash my face again to get this pollen out of my eyeballs. But we'll be back, I hope, please God, on Wednesday, the 19th of June. Thank you to all you new members. I know some of you have emailed me to say that you've just picked up a membership, so you'll just be receiving news for the first time. And we hope you enjoy it. Do please leave comments in the video, which is unlisted, so it's only available to members. But in the same way as you would on our main channel, please feel free to leave comments, engage with one another, and email us anytime, info@catholicunscripted.com. With my croaky voice, I'm going, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.